My name is Margaret Thompson, and I'm 62 years old. As I sat in that sterile hospital room watching my husband Frank connected to machines that were keeping him alive, I never imagined my own son would walk through that door and tell me to let his father die. Derek stood there with realtor papers in his hand, his voice cold as ice when he said, "Mom, stop wasting money on Dad's ventilator. Sign these papers and sell the house." The words hit me like a physical blow, but what came next was even worse. Before I share what happened when my family turned against me during the darkest moment of my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you believe families should stick together during tough times, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about overcoming betrayal. Now, let me tell you how my son's greed nearly destroyed everything I held dear, and how I found the strength to fight back when everyone told me to give up hope. 3 weeks earlier, Frank and I were sitting at our kitchen table sharing our morning coffee, just like we had for 37 years of marriage. He was reading the newspaper, making his usual comments about the sports section, when suddenly his face went slack and the coffee cup slipped from his fingers. I watched in horror as my strong, vibrant husband collapsed right in front of me, his body convulsing as a massive stroke ravaged his brain. I'll never forget the panic in my voice as I dialed 911, my hands shaking so violently I could barely press the numbers. "Please, my husband is having a stroke. He's not responding." The paramedics arrived within minutes, but those minutes felt like hours as I held Frank's hand and begged him to stay with me. During the ambulance ride to Regional Medical Center, I kept whispering prayers and promises, telling Frank about all the things we still needed to do together, the grandchildren we needed to see grow up. Dr. Williams, the neurologist, met me in the emergency waiting room with the kind of expression that immediately told me our lives had changed forever. He explained that Frank had suffered a severe hemorrhagic stroke affecting the left side of his brain, causing significant damage to areas controlling speech, movement, and consciousness. The bleeding had been extensive, and while they had managed to relieve some pressure through emergency surgery, Frank remained in a critical state, dependent on life support equipment to breathe. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to be honest with you about your husband's condition," Dr. Williams said gently. "The next 72 hours will be crucial, but even if Frank survives, we're looking at extensive rehabilitation, and there's no guarantee he'll regain consciousness or meaningful function." The words felt surreal, like he was talking about someone else's husband, not my Frank who had been laughing at a comic strip just hours earlier. When Derek arrived at the hospital that first day, I was relieved to have family support. Our son had always been practical, perhaps too practical, but I thought his business background would help us navigate the medical decisions ahead. However, within hours of learning about his father's condition, Derek was already asking questions that made my stomach turn. "Mom, what's the long-term prognosis realistically? What are we looking at financially? Does Dad have adequate life insurance coverage?" I understood that practical matters needed attention, but Derek's clinical approach to his father's life felt wrong. When I tried to focus on Frank's care and recovery possibilities, Derek would redirect the conversation to costs, insurance limitations, and quality of life considerations. His wife Brenda nodded along with everything Derek said, occasionally adding comments about how traumatic this was for their children, though they had barely visited their grandfather. The insurance situation became clearer over the following days, and it wasn't encouraging. Frank's policy covered acute care, but long-term ventilator support and rehabilitation would quickly exhaust our benefits. The hospital's financial counselor, Mrs. Peterson, explained that we were looking at potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket expenses if Frank required extended life support. Our savings, while substantial thanks to years of careful planning, wouldn't last indefinitely with these kinds of medical bills. Derek's response to this information was immediate and disturbing. "Mom, you need to think about this logically. Dad's quality of life is gone. You could end up losing everything trying to keep him alive when he's already gone." I stared at my son in disbelief, wondering when he had become someone who could calculate the dollar value of his father's life. This was the same man who used to crawl into Frank's lap for bedtime stories, who called him Daddy, until he was embarrassingly old, who Frank had worked double shifts to send to college. As the days passed and Frank remained unconscious on the ventilator, Derek's pressure intensified. He brought articles about death with dignity and statistics about recovery rates for severe stroke patients. He scheduled meetings with social workers and insurance representatives without consulting me first. Most disturbing of all, he began suggesting that Frank's condition was unfair to everyone, and that continuing aggressive treatment was selfish. I realized that while I was focused on my husband's potential recovery, my son was already planning his father's funeral and calculating inheritance values. Derek had become someone I didn't recognize, and for the first time in his 40-year life, I was genuinely afraid of what he might do. The foundation of trust between us was cracking, and I sensed that much worse was coming. On a Tuesday morning that started like any other hospital day, I arrived at Frank's room to find Derek deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. They were speaking in hushed tones near the window, occasionally glancing at Frank's motionless form and the various machines keeping him alive. When Derek noticed me, his expression shifted to something between guilt and determination. "Mom, this is Nathan Cross, an elder law attorney. I thought it would be helpful to get some professional guidance about Dad's situation." The attorney was a thin, sharp-faced man in an expensive suit who looked at me with the kind of calculating assessment that immediately put me on guard. Derek had clearly briefed him extensively about our family circumstances, because Nathan began explaining legal concepts I hadn't even considered. "Mrs. Thompson, your son is concerned about your decision-making capacity during this emotionally challenging time," Nathan said with practiced sympathy. "Sometimes family members become so focused on hope that they can't see the practical realities. Derek is worried that you might make choices that could devastate the family financially." The implication was clear. They thought I was incompetent to make decisions about Frank's care. Derek produced a folder filled with documents he had apparently been preparing for days. There were power of attorney transfer forms, medical directive changes, and most shocking of all, preliminary paperwork questioning my mental competency to handle Frank's medical decisions. "Mom, this isn't about taking control away from you. It's about protecting you from making choices you might regret later when you're thinking more clearly." Brenda chose that moment to make her entrance, carrying a small recording device and a notebook filled with what she claimed were examples of my declining mental state. She had apparently been documenting times when I forgot appointments, repeated myself, or seemed confused, painting a picture of a woman losing her grip on reality. The truth was that I had been exhausted and overwhelmed caring for Frank, but they were twisting normal stress responses into evidence of incompetence. "Margaret, we're just concerned about you," Brenda said with false sweetness. "Yesterday you couldn't remember which elevator bank led to the ICU, and last week you called Derek, Frank, twice during our conversation. We think the stress is affecting your judgment more than you realize." Every example she cited had an innocent explanation, but presented together, they created a narrative that made me sound like I was losing my mind. The betrayal deepened when Derek revealed he had been conducting his own investigation into our family finances. He had obtained copies of bank statements, insurance policies, and property records without my knowledge or permission. "Mom, I've calculated that keeping Dad on life support will cost approximately $22,000 per month after insurance coverage ends. You'll burn through your savings in 18 months, maybe less." Nathan the attorney nodded approvingly as Derek laid out his financial analysis. "Mrs. Thompson, your son has done extensive research. If you continue on this path, you'll likely need to liquidate assets, including your family home, just to pay for care that may not result in meaningful recovery. Derek is trying to protect your future security." The way they presented it, Derek sounded like a devoted son trying to save his mother from financial ruin. What happened next shattered my remaining illusions about Derek's motivations. Nathan explained that Derek had already filed preliminary paperwork with the county courthouse, formally requesting a competency evaluation and emergency conservatorship. "This is just a precautionary measure, Mrs. Thompson. If the evaluation shows you're capable of making rational decisions, the petition will be withdrawn. But if there are concerns about your judgment, Derek would temporarily assume responsibility for major financial and medical decisions." I felt like the hospital room was spinning around me. My own son, the child I had raised and sacrificed for, was trying to legally remove my authority to care for my husband. Derek insisted this was for everyone's protection, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. If he gained control over Frank's medical decisions, he could authorize discontinuing life support. If he controlled our finances, he could force the sale of assets to protect what he saw as his inheritance. The final blow came when Derek mentioned that he had contacted Frank's brother William in Phoenix, ostensibly to keep family informed about Frank's condition. But when William called me later that evening, he revealed the true nature of their conversation. Derek had asked William's opinion about mercy killing, and whether the family would support letting Frank go peacefully. Derek was building a case that the family consensus supported ending Frank's life. Derek had been planning this takeover for weeks, possibly since the day of Frank's stroke. While I was focused on hope and healing, my son was calculating costs and planning to eliminate what he saw as a financial drain on the family resources. The realization that Derek had never believed his father might recover, that he had been manipulating the situation from the beginning, broke something inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. I was still reeling from Derek's legal maneuvering when Jessica Kane, a real estate agent from Preston and Associates, appeared at the hospital with a leather portfolio and an unnaturally bright smile. Derek had apparently scheduled this meeting without informing me, and Jessica launched into her presentation as if Frank's life or death situation was merely a minor inconvenience requiring quick property liquidation. "Mrs. Thompson, Derek has shown me your lovely home on Maple Street, and I have excellent news. In today's market, we can list your property at $850,000 and expect multiple offers within the first week." Jessica spread glossy photographs of our house across the small table in Frank's room, pointing out value-adding features, like the renovated kitchen and mature landscaping. The casual way she discussed selling our home while Frank lay unconscious just feet away felt like a violation of everything sacred. Derek's excitement about the potential sale was disturbing to witness. He had already arranged for a professional appraisal, conducted a preliminary market analysis, and researched comparable properties in our neighborhood. "Mom, the timing is actually perfect. Interest rates are favorable for buyers, and inventory is low, which means we'll get top dollar. The equity from the house sale would cover Dad's medical expenses for years, if necessary." What Derek hadn't told me was that he had already shown the house to potential buyers. Mrs. Rodriguez, our neighbor of 15 years, later told me she had seen strangers walking through our property with Derek and a real estate agent while I was at the hospital. They had examined our garden, discussed renovation possibilities, and measured rooms as if Frank and I were already gone. Derek had keys made and was treating our family home like his personal asset to liquidate. As I sat in that sterile hospital room looking at photographs of my beloved house, memories flooded back of the life Frank and I had built together within those walls. We had purchased the lot 28 years ago when Derek was just 12 years old, spending months planning every detail of our dream home. Frank had insisted on doing much of the work himself, spending weekends installing hardwood floors, building custom shelves, and creating the garden that became my sanctuary. Every room held precious memories that couldn't be reduced to market value. The kitchen where Frank taught Derek to make pancakes on Saturday mornings. The living room where we hosted Christmas celebrations and birthday parties. The master bedroom where I had nursed Derek through childhood illnesses and where Frank and I had shared quiet conversations about our hopes and dreams. The basement workshop where Frank spent countless hours on woodworking projects, creating handmade toys for his grandchildren and custom furniture that reflected his love and craftsmanship. Derek seemed oblivious to the emotional significance of the house, focusing entirely on financial calculations. "Mom, you're being sentimental about bricks and mortar. Dad would want you to be practical. He always said the house was an investment, not a shrine." But Derek was wrong about his father's feelings. Frank had often said our home represented everything we had accomplished together, a tangible symbol of our partnership and perseverance. Brenda contributed her own pressure tactics, fake tears streaming down her face as she talked about family financial security. She claimed their children's college funds were at risk if we didn't make smart decisions about liquidating assets. "Margaret, we're all making sacrifices here. Derek took time off work to handle these arrangements. The least you can do is be reasonable about the house situation." Her manipulation was transparent but effective at creating guilt and emotional pressure. The situation escalated when Derek threatened legal action if I continued to resist his practical solution. Nathan Cross, the attorney, explained that if Derek gained conservatorship, he would have authority to sell the house regardless of my wishes. Mrs. Thompson, if the court determines that you're making financially irresponsible decisions due to emotional distress, Derek would be legally empowered to liquidate assets to pay for appropriate care. The message was clear: cooperate or face forced compliance. Derek had also been intercepting and hiding medical bills, insurance correspondence, and hospital financial statements. I discovered this when I asked about specific charges and he couldn't produce documentation he claimed to be managing. Mrs. Rodriguez later told me she had seen Derek removing mail from our mailbox on multiple occasions, apparently trying to control information flow and maintain his narrative about mounting financial crisis. The house had become more than property in this battle. It represented my independence, my memories with Frank, and my right to make decisions about our shared life. Derek saw it as an asset to be liquidated for medical expenses, but to me, it was the foundation of everything Frank and I had built together. Selling it would mean admitting defeat, abandoning hope, and accepting Derek's cold calculation that Frank's life wasn't worth the cost of preserving our family legacy. Just when I felt completely isolated and overwhelmed by Derek's systematic campaign to control my life, an unexpected ally emerged from the most unlikely source. Patricia Davis, the night shift nurse who had been caring for Frank, approached me during one of my late evening vigils with information that changed everything I thought I knew about Derek's manipulations. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to tell you something that happened last week," Patricia said quietly, glancing around to make sure we couldn't be overheard. "Your son approached me privately and offered me $500 to document what he called concerning behaviors in your visits with your husband. He wanted me to note times when you seemed confused, agitated, or unable to understand medical information." Patricia's revelation hit me like a physical blow. Derek had been trying to bribe hospital staff to create false evidence of my incompetence. Patricia continued her devastating account of Derek's behind-the-scenes manipulation. "He specifically asked me to note if you talked to your husband as if he could hear you, if you seemed to misunderstand his condition, or if you made what he called unrealistic statements about recovery possibilities. When I refused to participate, he implied that my job might be at risk if I didn't cooperate with family wishes." Derek had been systematically trying to build a case against me using corrupted medical professionals. The conversation with Patricia revealed the extent of Derek's planning and deception. She told me about phone calls Derek had made to other staff members, meetings with hospital administrators where he questioned the appropriateness of continued care, and his requests for professional opinions about my psychological state. Derek had been working multiple angles simultaneously, trying to create an environment where his version of reality would be accepted by medical and legal authorities. Frank's best friend Robert Martinez provided another crucial source of support when he visited later that week. Robert had known Frank for over 30 years, since their days working construction together, and his loyalty to our family was unquestioned. When I explained Derek's legal maneuvering and financial pressure tactics, Robert's response was immediate and fierce. "Margaret, Frank would roll over in his grave if he knew Derek was treating you this way. That boy has forgotten where he came from." Robert shared disturbing information about conversations Derek had initiated with him and other family friends. "Derek called me last week asking about Frank's true wishes regarding life support and whether Frank had ever expressed concerns about being kept alive artificially. He was fishing for quotes he could use to justify his position, but I told him Frank never said any such thing. Your husband is a fighter, Margaret, and he would want you to fight for him." The network of Derek's deception expanded when my sister Helen called from Portland with shocking news. Derek had contacted her claiming I was having a nervous breakdown and needed family intervention. "Margaret, I was ready to drive down here to help you, but something in Derek's tone didn't sit right. He kept asking about your history of emotional instability and whether you had ever made poor financial decisions. It sounded like he was building a case against you rather than trying to help." Helen's initial willingness to believe Derek's story revealed how convincing his manipulation had become. "He made it sound like you were spending money frantically, making irrational medical decisions, and unable to accept reality about Frank's condition. But when I asked specific questions, his answers were vague and contradictory. That's when I realized he might be lying about the whole situation. Helen's support became crucial as Derek had been counting on family members accepting his version of events without question. The betrayal deepened when social worker Amanda Anderson arrived for what Derek had arranged as a routine welfare check. Derek had contacted Adult Protective Services claiming I was under extreme stress and potentially neglecting my own health while making poor decisions about Frank's care. Ms. Anderson's questions were clearly designed to assess my mental competency and decision-making capacity. Derek's formal petition for emergency conservatorship was filed 3 days later, with a court date scheduled in exactly 10 days. The legal documents painted a picture of a grieving widow who had lost touch with reality, making financially devastating decisions while caring for a husband who would never recover. Derek's lawyer had crafted the petition skillfully, using my devotion to Frank as evidence of impaired judgment rather than loving commitment. The financial warfare escalated when I discovered Derek had somehow gained access to our joint checking accounts and placed holds on major transactions. When I tried to withdraw money to pay for an attorney, the bank informed me that Derek had filed paperwork claiming I was potentially incompetent and that large withdrawals should be reviewed by family members. Derek was systematically cutting off my access to resources I would need to fight his legal challenge. Robert Martinez's offer to pay for legal representation became my lifeline when Derek's financial manipulations left me nearly helpless. Margaret, Frank and I have been friends for 3 decades. He would do the same for my wife if our situations were reversed. Don't let Derek's greed destroy everything you and Frank built together. Robert became my first crucial ally in what was becoming an all-out war for Frank's life and our family legacy. Robert's financial support allowed me to hire Sarah Kim, an experienced elder law attorney who specialized in family conservatorship disputes. Sarah's initial assessment of Derek's petition was both encouraging and deeply disturbing. Mrs. Thompson, your son's case has several legal weaknesses, but he's clearly been planning this for a considerable time. The coordination between legal filings, medical documentation requests, and financial account restrictions suggests sophisticated preparation. Sarah immediately began investigating Derek's motivations and discovered information that explained his sudden urgency about liquidating family assets. Derek's business, a small marketing consultancy, was failing dramatically due to poor management and client defections. Court records revealed multiple judgments against Derek for unpaid debts, including a significant gambling debt to a Las Vegas casino that had resulted in legal threats against his family. Your son owes approximately $180,000 to various creditors, Sarah explained. His mortgage is 3 months behind, his business accounts have been seized, and Brenda's family has apparently been pressuring them for money they borrowed for a failed real estate investment. Derek isn't trying to save your finances, he's trying to access your finances to save himself. The investigation revealed that Brenda's family had loaned Derek and Brenda $60,000 for a commercial property purchase that had gone into foreclosure. Brenda's parents were threatening legal action and demanding immediate repayment, which explained Brenda's enthusiastic support for selling my house. They saw Frank's medical situation as an opportunity to access family wealth that could solve their financial crisis. Derek's desperation became more apparent when he attempted to circumvent my authority by approaching hospital administrators directly. Sarah discovered that Derek had requested meetings with Dr. Collins, the hospital administrator, to discuss discontinuing fetal care and protecting family resources from unreasonable medical expenses. Derek was trying to convince hospital management to override my decisions about Frank's treatment. The financial pressure on the hospital added another layer of complexity to the situation. Dr. Collins had initially been sympathetic to Derek's position because unpaid medical bills were mounting rapidly. Mrs. Thompson, I must be honest about the hospital's situation, Dr. Collins admitted during a meeting Sarah arranged. We've already provided nearly $400,000 in uncompensated care, and continued treatment without payment guarantees creates serious concerns for our institution. Derek had been feeding the hospital administration misleading information about our family's financial situation, claiming that continued care would result in complete financial ruin and potential bankruptcy. Your son presented documentation suggesting that your assets were insufficient to cover projected medical expenses, Dr. Collins explained. He indicated that you were making emotional rather than rational decisions about affordable care options. The legal battle intensified when Derek's expensive legal team, obviously paid for with borrowed money, filed additional motions questioning my psychological fitness. They requested court-ordered psychiatric evaluations, financial competency assessments, and testimony from medical professionals about my unrealistic expectations regarding Frank's recovery potential. Derek was using every legal weapon available to support his conservatorship petition. Sarah's counter-investigation revealed crucial evidence of Derek's fraudulent activities. Security footage from the hospital showed Derek attempting to access Frank's medical equipment during late-night visits when he thought no one was watching. Mrs. Thompson, your son was apparently trying to find ways to disconnect or disable your husband's life support equipment, Sarah said grimly. This goes far beyond financial disagreements into potential criminal behavior. The most damaging evidence against Derek came from insurance company records that Sarah subpoenaed. Derek had been submitting false claims and forged documents to accelerate insurance payouts, apparently planning to redirect funds to pay his personal debts rather than Frank's medical expenses. Your son committed insurance fraud by signing your name to documents authorizing changes in beneficiary information and payout procedures, Sarah explained. Patricia Davis, the night nurse who had become my advocate, provided crucial testimony about Derek's inappropriate behavior and his attempts to bribe medical staff. Her detailed documentation of Derek's visits, conversations, and requests created a pattern of manipulation and deception that supported my position. Patricia risked her job by speaking out, but her conscience wouldn't allow Derek's behavior to continue unchallenged. Dr. Collins's initial support for Derek's position began wavering when Sarah presented evidence of Derek's fraudulent insurance claims and false statements about family finances. The hospital administrator realized that Derek had been manipulating information to serve his personal agenda rather than providing accurate assessments of our situation. The hospital's legal department became concerned about potential liability for cooperating with Derek's questionable activities. The conservatorship hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, giving us only 4 days to prepare our defense against Derek's well-orchestrated legal assault. Sarah worked around the clock gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and building a case that would expose Derek's true motivations while demonstrating my competency to make decisions about Frank's care. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If Derek won, he would gain legal authority to discontinue Frank's life support and liquidate our assets to pay his debts. The conservatorship hearing began on a gray Monday morning in Judge Harrison's courtroom, and from the moment Derek's attorney Marcus Webb stood to present their case, I realized the full extent of the character assassination my son had orchestrated. Webb painted a picture of a grief-stricken widow who had lost touch with reality, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on futile medical treatment while ignoring practical financial concerns. Your Honor, Mrs. Thompson's emotional attachment to her husband has clouded her judgment to the point where she cannot make rational decisions about his care or the family's financial security, Webb argued persuasively. Her son Derek is simply trying to protect his mother from making choices that will destroy everything the family has worked to build over decades of careful planning and saving. Derek had recruited 3 character witnesses who testified about my supposed declining mental state. Tom Bradley, a neighbor I barely knew, claimed I had seemed confused and disoriented during recent conversations. Linda Foster, a woman from our church, testified that I had repeated the same stories multiple times during coffee hour. Dr. Martinez, a physician friend of Derek's, suggested that prolonged stress could cause temporary cognitive impairment that might affect decision-making capacity. Each witness testimony felt like another nail in my coffin. Derek had apparently spent weeks coaching these people, helping them remember concerning behaviors that could be interpreted as evidence of incompetence. Webb presented their statements skillfully, creating a narrative of gradual mental decline exacerbated by the trauma of Frank's stroke. The cumulative effect was devastating, even though I knew their characterizations were either exaggerated or completely false. Sarah fought back aggressively, but Judge Harrison seemed increasingly sympathetic to Derek's practical approach to Frank's medical situation. When Sarah questioned the witnesses about their qualifications to assess mental competence, their relationships with Derek, and the suspicious timing of their observations, Webb objected repeatedly and the judge sustained most objections. The legal system seemed stacked against emotional appeals and in favor of cold financial calculations. The low point came when I was called to testify on my own behalf. Webb's cross-examination was brutal and personal, designed to provoke emotional reactions that would support Derek's claims about my instability. "Mrs. Thompson, isn't it true that you've been talking to your unconscious husband as if he can hear and respond to you? Isn't that behavior consistent with someone who has lost touch with medical reality?" My emotional breakdown during testimony nearly destroyed our case. When Webb pressed me about Frank's prognosis and suggested that continuing treatment was prolonging suffering rather than preserving life, I began crying uncontrollably. Judge Harrison called a brief recess, but the damage was done. My tears looked like evidence of the emotional instability Derek's team had been claiming, rather than the natural grief of a woman fighting for her husband's life. During the recess, Sarah tried to reassure me that emotional testimony wasn't necessarily harmful, but I could see concern in her eyes. Derek's legal strategy was working exactly as planned. They had successfully framed my love and devotion as evidence of impaired judgment, while presenting Derek's financial calculations as evidence of clear thinking and family responsibility. The legal system seemed designed to reward cold pragmatism over human compassion. The hearing resumed with medical testimony that initially seemed to support Derek's position. Dr. Williams, Frank's neurologist, testified honestly about the severity of Frank's condition and the limited likelihood of meaningful recovery. When Webb asked about the financial costs of continued care and whether resources might be better allocated to other family needs, Dr. Williams's clinical responses seemed to support Derek's practical approach. However, just as I was preparing for complete defeat, Dr. Williams mentioned something that changed the entire trajectory of the hearing. During his most recent examination, Frank had shown slight but measurable improvement in brain activity. There have been minor but consistent responses to stimuli over the past week, including eye movement tracking and what appears to be intentional finger pressure when prompted. While these improvements are modest, they suggest some level of consciousness that wasn't present initially. Derek's reaction to this news was telling and ultimately self-destructive. Instead of showing relief or hope about his father's improvement, Derek immediately challenged the medical evidence. "Dr. Williams, isn't it true that these so-called improvements could be involuntary reflexes rather than conscious responses? Isn't my mother grasping at false hope rather than accepting medical reality?" Derek's dismissive attitude toward any possibility of his father's recovery revealed his true priorities. Judge Harrison noticed Derek's inappropriate response to positive medical news. Sarah seized the opportunity to point out that Derek seemed more invested in his father's continued unconsciousness than in potential recovery. "Your Honor, Mr. Derek Thompson appears to be arguing against his father's improvement, which raises serious questions about his motivations in seeking conservatorship over family medical decisions." The hearing recessed for lunch with the outcome still uncertain. Derek's legal team had presented a compelling case for financial conservatorship, but his callous response to Frank's medical progress had damaged his credibility. Judge Harrison seemed torn between practical financial concerns and disturbing evidence about Derek's true motivations. I faced the very real possibility of losing control over Frank's care and our family assets within hours. During the lunch break, I experienced my darkest moment of doubt. Maybe Derek was right about the financial impossibility of continued care. Maybe I was being selfish by spending everything we had worked for on medical treatment that might not restore Frank to meaningful life. Maybe the kindest thing would be to let Frank go peacefully rather than prolonging uncertainty and financial stress for everyone involved. The weight of responsibility felt crushing, and I questioned everything I thought I believed about love, hope, and family obligation. The afternoon session began with Sarah presenting evidence that completely transformed the court's understanding of Derek's motivations and character. Patricia Davis took the witness stand with professional composure and devastating testimony about Derek's attempts to manipulate medical records and bribe hospital staff to support his conservatorship case. "Your Honor, Mr. Derek Thompson approached me on November 15 and offered me $500 to document what he termed inappropriate behaviors during his mother's hospital visits, Patricia testified clearly. When I refused, he suggested that my job security might depend on my willingness to cooperate with family wishes regarding patient care decisions. Sarah then presented security footage that Robert Martinez had helped obtain through his connections with hospital maintenance staff. The video showed Derek late one night attempting to access Frank's medical equipment, apparently trying to understand how to disconnect or disable the ventilator system. Your Honor, this footage shows Mr. Derek Thompson examining life support equipment during unauthorized visits, suggesting intentions that go far beyond financial concerns. The revelation about Derek's gambling debts and business failures came next, with documentation that Sarah had gathered from court records and creditor filings. Derek owed money to multiple casinos, had defaulted on business loans, and faced potential bankruptcy unless he could access immediate cash resources. Your Honor, Mr. Derek Thompson's motivation for seeking conservatorship appears to be personal financial desperation rather than concern for his mother's welfare. Brenda's family pressure added another layer to Derek's motivation. Sarah presented email communications between Derek and Brenda's parents demanding repayment of loans used for failed real estate investments. The messages revealed threats of legal action and family estrangement if Derek couldn't produce immediate repayment, explaining his sudden urgency about liquidating my assets. The insurance fraud evidence proved to be the most damaging revelation. Sarah presented documents showing Derek had forged my signature on insurance claims, changed beneficiary information without authorization, and attempted to redirect payments to accounts he controlled. Your Honor, Mr. Derek Thompson has committed multiple felonies in his efforts to access family financial resources for his personal use. Dr. Williams returned to the witness stand with updated information about Frank's continued improvement. Over the weekend, Frank had demonstrated clear responsiveness to voice commands, deliberate hand squeezing, and what appeared to be attempted communication through facial expressions. While Mr. Thompson's recovery remains uncertain, these improvements suggest conscious awareness that wasn't present during his initial treatment period. Judge Harrison's demeanor changed dramatically as Sarah's evidence accumulated. Derek's attorney Marcus Webb tried desperately to redirect focus back to financial concerns and my supposed incompetence, but the fraud evidence and security footage had fundamentally altered the court's perception of Derek's credibility. Webb requested a continuance to address the new allegations, but Judge Harrison denied the motion. Robert Martinez testified about Derek's attempts to manipulate family members and friends into supporting his version of events. Your Honor, Derek Thompson called me asking leading questions about Frank's supposed wishes regarding life support, apparently trying to create false evidence that Frank wouldn't want continued care. When I refused to provide the answers he wanted, he became angry and accusatory. Mrs. Rodriguez, my neighbor, provided testimony about Derek's secretive activities around our house, including showing the property to potential buyers without my knowledge and removing mail from our mailbox. I've lived next door to the Thompsons for 15 years, and I've never seen Margaret exhibit any signs of mental confusion or incompetence. Derek's behavior, however, has been increasingly strange and aggressive. The most powerful moment came when Patricia brought additional evidence of Derek's criminal behavior. She had been recording phone conversations with Derek after his initial bribery attempt, creating documentation of his continued efforts to manipulate medical staff and influence Frank's care decisions. Your Honor, Mr. Derek Thompson explicitly stated that he needed his father's death to appear natural and medically justified to avoid insurance complications. Derek's desperate final gambit backfired spectacularly when he demanded to cross-examine witnesses personally rather than allowing his attorney to handle questioning. Derek's aggressive interrogation of Patricia revealed his true character, including angry outbursts about wasted money and false hope that demonstrated his complete lack of empathy for Frank's situation. Judge Harrison's ruling was swift and decisive. Mr. Derek Thompson's petition for conservatorship is denied. Furthermore, this court is referring evidence of insurance fraud, document forgery, and attempted medical interference to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Mrs. Margaret Thompson retains full authority over her husband's medical care and family financial decisions. The aftermath was immediate and satisfying. Derek's attorney withdrew from the case when criminal charges became likely, leaving Derek to face potential prosecution without legal representation he could no longer afford. Brenda, realizing her husband faced jail time and their family's financial situation was hopeless, filed for divorce and moved out with their children within days. Judge Harrison issued additional orders protecting me from Derek's interference, including restraining orders preventing him from accessing our property, contacting medical providers, or approaching Frank without supervision. The court also ordered Derek to return any family financial documents he had obtained without authorization and to cease all contact with insurance companies regarding Frank's benefits. Frank's continued improvement provided the perfect counterpoint to Derek's claims about feudal care. Over the following week, Frank began responding to his name, following simple commands, and showing clear recognition when I entered his room. The medical staff who had initially supported Derek's practical approach now acknowledged that Frank's recovery potential had been significantly underestimated. The criminal charges against Derek moved forward swiftly once the district attorney's office reviewed the evidence Sarah had compiled. Derek faced multiple felony counts including insurance fraud, document forgery, elder financial abuse, and attempted medical interference. His gambling debts and business failures had created a paper trail that prosecutors found compelling evidence of motive for his elaborate scheme. Brenda's divorce proceedings revealed additional disturbing details about Derek's deception and financial manipulation. During asset disclosure hearings, it became clear that Derek had been systematically hiding debts and lying about the family's financial situation for months. Brenda's attorney presented evidence that Derek had forged her signature on loan documents and used their children's college funds to pay gambling debts. Derek's business partners filed a civil lawsuit revealing that Derek had embezzled client funds to pay personal expenses, including legal fees for his conservatorship case against me. The marketing consultancy that Derek had claimed was thriving was actually under investigation by the state licensing board for fraudulent billing practices and misuse of client accounts. Derek's professional reputation was destroyed along with his personal relationships. Frank's recovery continued steadily, confounding the medical predictions that Derek had used to justify discontinuing care. Within 6 weeks of the court hearing, Frank was speaking single words clearly, eating soft foods without assistance, and participating in basic physical therapy exercises. His neurologist revised the prognosis from poor to cautiously optimistic regarding potential for meaningful recovery. The house that had become central to our legal battle remained in my possession, but I made the difficult decision to sell our vacation cabin in the mountains to help pay for Frank's ongoing medical expenses. The cabin sale generated enough funds to cover several months of care without touching our primary savings or forcing the sale of our family home. Robert and Patricia had been right. There were alternatives to Derek's scorched earth approach. Community support emerged from unexpected sources once word spread about our situation. The congregation at our church organized a fundraiser that raised over $15,000 for Frank's medical expenses. Neighbors who had heard about Derek's behavior offered practical help including meal preparation, lawn maintenance, and transportation to medical appointments. The network of genuine care contrasted sharply with Derek's calculated manipulation. Derek's final attempt at reconciliation came through a letter delivered by his court-appointed public defender. The letter claimed that Derek's actions had been motivated by concern for my welfare and that his financial problems had clouded his judgment. Derek requested forgiveness and suggested that family therapy might help repair our relationship. The letter's self-serving tone and continued justifications convinced me that Derek hadn't learned anything from the consequences of his behavior. Frank's first clearly spoken words came during a quiet evening when I was reading him updates from cards and letters we had received from friends and family. He looked directly at me and said, "Thank you, Margaret. Love you." The simple phrase represented everything Derek had nearly destroyed through his greed and callousness. Frank's gratitude confirmed that my fight to preserve his life had been worthwhile regardless of financial costs. Derek's harassment continued even after the restraining orders were issued. He was arrested twice for violating court orders, once for attempting to contact Frank's insurance company using false identification, and again for confronting me in the hospital parking lot demanding reasonable discussion about family finances. Each violation resulted in additional criminal charges and extended the restraining order period. The revelation that Derek had been planning this scheme since Frank's initial stroke became clear through email evidence recovered from his computer during the criminal investigation. Derek had researched conservatorship laws, consulted with attorneys about challenging parental competence, and calculated property values within days of Frank's hospitalization. His grief and concern had been entirely fabricated performances designed to manipulate family members and medical professionals. The most satisfying consequence was watching Derek's carefully constructed facade crumble under legal scrutiny. Friends and colleagues who had initially supported Derek's practical approach distanced themselves when evidence of his fraud and deception became public knowledge. Derek's reputation in the business community was destroyed, making future employment difficult even if he avoided prison time. Frank's improvement also vindicated my decision to trust medical professionals who emphasized recovery potential rather than limiting their focus to statistical probabilities. The physical therapy team that had initially been skeptical about Frank's prospects became enthusiastic advocates for continued aggressive rehabilitation. Frank's progress reminded everyone involved that human resilience often exceeds medical predictions. 6 months after Derek's scheme collapsed, Frank was sitting up in a wheelchair with assistants and participating in conversations about current events and family matters. His speech remained somewhat slowed, and his left side mobility was limited, but his personality and intelligence were clearly intact. Derek had been willing to end his father's life to access inheritance money, missing the opportunity to witness Frank's remarkable recovery journey. 1 year after that terrible day when Derek walked into Frank's hospital room with real estate papers, I'm sitting in our renovated kitchen watching my husband feed himself breakfast with determination and pride. Frank's recovery exceeded every medical prediction, though he continues using a wheelchair for mobility and speaks somewhat slowly due to lingering stroke effects. The man Derek wanted to abandon for financial convenience has regained enough function to live at home with modifications we made using money from the vacation cabin sale. Frank's gratitude for my decision to fight for his life remains the greatest validation I could have received. During quiet moments, he often tells me that hearing my voice during his unconscious period gave him strength to keep fighting. The love that Derek characterized as unrealistic sentiment became the foundation for Frank's recovery and our renewed appreciation for each other. We've learned to treasure simple conversations and shared meals that Derek would have prevented forever. The house modifications we made for Frank's accessibility turned out to be surprisingly manageable financially. Robert Martinez, who had become like a brother to us during the crisis, organized volunteer work parties to install ramps, widen doorways, and create a main floor bedroom suite. The community support that emerged during our darkest period continued long after the legal battles ended, demonstrating the power of genuine relationships versus Derek's calculated manipulation. Derek completed 18 months of community service after pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation in recovering misappropriated funds. His professional license was permanently revoked. Brenda's divorce was finalized with minimal asset distribution due to Derek's debts, and he relocated to another state where his criminal record made employment difficult. Derek's children, my grandchildren, visit us regularly now that Brenda controls custody decisions. Patricia Davis left her hospital position to start a private care coordination service, partly inspired by her experiences advocating for our family against institutional pressure. She continues checking on Frank's progress and has become a trusted family friend. Her courage in speaking out against Derek's manipulation saved Frank's life and preserved our family's integrity. Patricia's ethical stance reminds me that individual character matters more than institutional authority. Robert Martinez's friendship proved invaluable not just during the crisis but throughout Frank's recovery period. Robert visits weekly to play chess with Frank, share construction industry news, and provide the male companionship that Frank missed during his hospitalization. Robert's loyalty demonstrates the difference between chosen family who support you unconditionally and blood relatives who calculate the cost of their affection. Mrs. Rodriguez, our neighbor who testified against Derek's deception, became an unexpected source of daily support during Frank's transition home. She checks on us regularly, helps with grocery shopping, and provides the kind of practical assistance that makes independent living possible for elderly couples facing health challenges. Her kindness contrasts sharply with Derek's cold assessment that caregiving was inefficient use of resources. Frank volunteers at the Stroke Recovery Support Group at Regional Medical Center, sharing his experience with families facing similar decisions about aggressive treatment versus comfort care. His presence provides hope for other families dealing with devastating medical diagnoses and pressure from relatives who prioritize financial considerations over recovery potential. Frank's advocacy work gives his survival additional purpose and meaning. I've learned to set firm boundaries with family members who demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice Frank's life for personal financial gain. Derek's siblings, who initially supported his practical approach, have attempted reconciliation now that Frank's recovery is obvious. However, their willingness to abandon Frank during his most vulnerable period revealed character flaws that can't be overlooked for the sake of family harmony. The experience taught me that blood relationships don't automatically create loyalty, while chosen relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care can provide stronger support than biological family connections. Derek's betrayal was devastating precisely because I had assumed parental love guaranteed his loyalty to family welfare. Patricia, Robert, and Mrs. Rodriguez proved that ethical strangers can become truer family than biological relatives. Frank and I spend our evenings reviewing the letters and cards we received from friends, neighbors, and church members during the crisis period. The overwhelming support we received from our community provides ongoing comfort and reminds us that most people understand the value of fighting for loved ones regardless of financial costs. Derek's coldly calculated approach was an aberration, not a reflection of normal human values. The financial impact of Frank's medical care was significant but manageable through careful planning, community support, and strategic asset decisions. We avoided Derek's scorched earth approach of liquidating everything immediately, instead making thoughtful choices about which resources to use for medical expenses. The family home that Derek wanted to sell remains our sanctuary and symbol of everything we built together through decades of partnership. My advice for anyone facing similar family pressure during medical crises is to remember that love and loyalty can't be calculated in dollars and cents. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do for someone is refuse to give up on them when everyone else considers them too expensive to save. Frank's recovery proves that hope and determination can overcome both medical predictions and family manipulation. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most challenging periods of my life. If you've ever faced pressure from family members who prioritized money over love, or if you've had to fight for someone who couldn't fight for themselves, please share your story in the comments below. Your experiences can provide hope and guidance for others facing similar battles. Please like this video if you believe that families should stand together during difficult times rather than calculating the financial cost of loyalty. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding strength in unexpected places. Share this video with anyone who needs to remember that love is worth fighting for, regardless of the price. I want to thank everyone who has supported families like ours through medical crises, and I hope Frank's story reminds you that miracles are possible when we refuse to give up on the people we love. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in courtrooms or hospitals, but in our hearts when we choose hope over fear and love over convenience.